session, as titled behind me, is going to be about trade, rerouting, trade strategies and systems from COVID to US-China war to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Trade has suffered over the past 3 years, and we've witnessed a lot of supply disruptions. So joining me today are three of the industry's experts that are going to be talking for the next 25 minutes about supply chain disruptions. So I'd like to welcome to stage Stuart Michael Whiting, who is the Senior Vice President of Logistics and Planning at Schneider Electric. Please give him a hand. Next, I'd like to welcome Rita Huang-Zin, who is the founder and CEO of iMile Delivery. And then I have Walter C. Johnsen, who is Chairman and CEO of Acme United. Welcome, Walter. All right, thank you guys for joining us today. It's very early in the morning, so I hope you're ready for some questions. We're going to start right away, right? I spoke about the US war with China. I spoke about supply chain disruptions that happened as a result of COVID. But I really want your opinions or your take on how it has been for you over the past 3 years. Stuart, I'll start with you. I mean, general outlook of how supply chain disruptions have affected your business.
For sure. Great question. I mean, certainly my career in supply chain is now nearly 30 years. And I can safely say the last 3 years have been the most challenging, where we've seen not just the pandemic, we saw port congestion, we saw shortages, we've seen inflation, conflict, geopolitics, as you said, and now strikes. And what we're really seeing is how we in the corporate world have now learned to better deal in these situations. For us, collaboration has been key. We've really seen how the supply chain with our suppliers and customers are learning to collaborate a lot better. The power of digitization and data, without doubt, is a true chemistry or the foundations to resilience in dealing with these situations. And we've seen supply chain move from the back office, where it was traditionally in the corporate world, to being very much in the front. And as such, many organizations are rethinking their supply chain, not just from resilience, but from the perspective or the spectrum of the full supply chain. And thus you'll see it in a lot of the corporate strategies like we have in Schneider Electric. And it's really seen now as a key pillar to performance, sustainability, agility, and resilience. And in Schneider, we embarked on a change program within supply chain about 3 years ago, beginning of 2020, called Strive, which addresses sustainability, trust with our customers, resilience, intelligence, velocity, and efficiency. So, you know, again, using the supply chain, we're seeing sustainability as being key. All new projects have carbon neutral and circular supply chains embedded in the platforms, as well as embracing local biodiversity. Resilience, multi-sourcing now. So really making sure that you mitigate risk in your upstream supply. And with that resilience, leveraging technology to really enhance the customer experience and provide them with full visibility. So across the intelligence pillar, again, leveraging digital and data so as to mitigate not just what we've been through in the last 3 years, but any future events that may be there for us.
Rita, you run a delivery business. I certainly use it a lot for all my shopping, but what exactly have been the supply chain disruptions that you have witnessed?
Sure. iMile is a delivery company dedicated for e-commerce. So we would say we know more e-commerce than the B2B trading logistic. I would say pandemic has enhanced the penetration of the e-commerce, and especially post-pandemic, we see that the other part of the world is going down, and Middle East is getting, I would say, from e-commerce point of view, I would say it's getting better and better. The volume we have seen happen during pandemic is not going away or stay. So I would say post-COVID, the volume of e-commerce for this region has almost doubled or 2.5 times in terms of volume comparing to pre-pandemic. I have also seen that due to the volumes increasement, e-commerce investors or e-commerce companies has built more confidence in the market, and now more and more supply chain is moving outside of the original of the supply chain countries. Let's say from China, from Turkey, we see that they are planning or they have made the decision of invest more in the warehouse. I would see some company may have make the decision of building like 200,000 square meter warehouse for the fulfillment. And I would say it's a kind of unexpected for us. And especially during the past Ramadan peak, the volume has got to the maximum. We haven't seen that in the past 5 or 6 years in our journey. So the e-commerce has become, something that no one can ignore. And it's not up. Someone may say e-commerce has fully penetrated, yes, but in terms of frequency of the buying in frequency has been, enhanced, and I would say there's a long way to go. Or if we can see that there's before pandemic, there's something like 5% or 3.5% of the retail has moved to e-commerce. Always say e-commerce penetration is lead to 3.5% to 5% pandemic. Post-pandemic, I would say the penetration may have been double. I don't have the number, but I would say from the data we have, the volume we have, I would say it's double or 2.5% in terms of the volume.
Right. Yeah. And then, Walter, from Acme United's perspective, and you deal a lot with China as well, how has it been for you?
Yeah, the Chinese team that we have in 3 offices, one in Ningbo, one in Guangzhou, one in Hong Kong, have been absolutely critical to our survival during the past 3 years. And you can imagine when 40 to 45% of your products come from China, whether it's in the US or Canada or in Europe or other operations, it's really important to have somebody at the other side to be able to ensure quality and timely delivery. And then when we laid on top of that the problems with container costs and shortages, and it was really, honestly, it was chaos. Our team delivered. And while we struggled, and under incredible circumstances, our Chinese team continued to work and carefully, the best they could, get our products out. It was just remarkable. One of the things that I'm troubled with is, having worked in China for the bulk of my career, I've got relationships with factory owners that go back from that time. I know their families, I know their children. They're almost family. And we work in an informal way. There's no contracts, there's really relationships. And it's outstanding. So as we're looking to expand our distribution channels into the Indo-Pacific, we've got an office in New Delhi, that's really supplementing what we're doing so well in China. And I wouldn't be surprised if a number of our partners in China move with us to set up operations in other locations. We started to do that in Myanmar, and then COVID happened, so that didn't occur. But I'm sure that as we move forward, our Chinese partners will be an important part of that, and I look forward to that.
Yeah. And sticking with you and with the China theme, China has reopened not long ago. What is the impact of that on supply chain for your company, and what does that mean for the trade war, the prolonged trade war between the U.S. and China? How is that affecting you?
Well, one of the things that happened during the past year was many retailers and other companies bought more inventory than they needed. And they did that because they didn't know when the next delivery would come. And there was a very large overhang. I would guess 6 to 9 months in some major retailers globally. And as they stopped to buy, that cleaned up the ports, it dropped the container prices very, very substantially. And you could look at a chart, there was one in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, where it went up and it went down in a very narrow period. And we're back to normal with that. The fact that the purchases we are making and others are, because of the oversupply in the retailers, means that the opening in China didn't get the burst of activity of our buying plus their recovery. I do see some normalization probably by the middle of July, and in the fall we'll be seeing the impact of China through its recovery and the retailers globally, I believe, starting to repurchase for the fall and the holiday season. So there'll be something more activity going. One of the issues that we're facing is our suppliers have started to sell their raw materials because they're operating at less than capacity because we're not placing orders. And so when we do, it's going to be a reorder of raw materials. It'll be a longer lead time for a short period till we re-up. And we're aware of that and addressing it.
Stuart, what would you say the reopening, what impact would you say the reopening has had on Schneider?
Well, we took a stance several years ago of creating what we call regional end-to-end supply chain hubs. So we've had a policy of China for a while, reducing a dependency there, but similar in Europe, similar in India, and similar in the United States. So one, we're somewhat insulated from the geopolitics that could influence trade and obviously our business as well. But similar to the experience that Walter's had, is we are seeing leveling out. You know, there is certainly bullwhip effect from the pandemic in terms of where inventories and everything are sitting. You've obviously got a challenge in China itself with particularly the residential market and the property market that's sitting there. So we didn't quite yet see the boom that we were hoping in China, but we believe it's coming. And then the key there is being ready, and ready is about proximity then. So making sure you've got the capacity, the raw materials and so forth to satisfy that demand.
Right. Rita, a theme that's been coming up quite a bit in this conference and other conferences around the region is tech. So I'm wondering, how can emerging technology be used to improve the process of supply chains, and what investments are you making to enhance those offerings, if you are?
As I have just said, right, I see a very strong trend that the supply chain is moving out of China and getting close to the e-commerce consumers. Let's say now if you want to buy something from a Chinese background e-commerce platform, it takes you 1 week at least, 7 to 10 days to get it. So you will see that the transit time is going to be shorter, and the final purpose or the final target will be you order now and you get it tomorrow or the same day. So in order to match the consumer's requirement, there's a supply chain move. The stock, let's say the fashions, is going to move from China, from Turkey, to be in the country where the consumers are. In order to solve this problem, we are very strongly investing in the automation. So you will see that with the big warehouse, like 200,000 square meter warehouse, you have, let's say, millions of items stay in the stock. In order to pick the items, it's actually a very high-tech job. So I would say for IMI, the next, direction for the technology investment is automation. You will see that already we have seen this happen in China and US, that some of the big storage warehouses know any people. There's no any people, it's all automation robots to work in the warehouse without people interaction. I know it's not exist in this part of the world, but it's coming. The second part, I mean, this is for the warehouse operation or supply chain relocation. For the last mile delivery, we're also investing in the autumn routing, right? So you will see that one driver, when they deliver the order, they may go with Google Maps, but it's very low efficient. The technology we are developing now is that when you put all the order into driver's app, you don't need to go with the Google Map. The system, auto routing system, is going to tell you which order to be delivered as the first stop, which one is the second, which one is the last one. That can help the efficient improvement and eventually it will reduce the cost. I would say e-commerce is, I mean, we're just at 20 to 30% of the, let's say, the penetration or the journey. I see that 70% of the work is going to be done in the coming 3 to 5 years. And the driven of those evolution is technology.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Walter, any technology phenomenon that you think is going to break the market over the next?
Well, one of the things that we are doing to bring supply chain closer to our customers is automation. And in the US, we have one of 2 FDA facilities for making alcohol wipes, which are used to sterilize your arm before injection. Just recently, we installed a huge printing press that we bought from China. And it took 4 shipping containers. A Chinese staff has been on site at our facility for 4 weeks, training and assembling and teaching us how to run this efficiently. And when we get done with that, we'll have 4 times the capacity and 6 times the speed that we started with. And we're working on some robotics to then take these little 2x2 paquettes and put them in 25, 50, and 100 count boxes for shipment worldwide. And that automation allows us to be able to be closer to the end user. We're seeing similar things with some filling machines that we're buying in Brazil. And that's going, again, it shortens the supply chain, it's automation, and it's a quick delivery. We're thrilled with that.
Yeah. Stuart, anything that is different from any technology that you're working on?
Well, really, just to complement both Rita and Walter and what they shared, and many organizations now in supply chain recognize that you've got to leverage digital and data. Strong data governance allows you to orchestrate your supply chain end to end. And with that, the drive to autonomous supply chains. So we're really starting to explore the science of taking humans out of the loop, which for us in the transactional side certainly drives better performance, greater efficiency, and greater sustainability as well. But as human assets are so rare and so difficult to find in today's world, it's really allowing them to focus on where to differentiate in the supply chain, particularly in the eyes of the customer. So whilst we're driving digital supply chains, we've got to remember that they're human-centric. So for us, it's about not just the processes and the technology, it's about investing and empowering the people and really creating that digital mindset for the future, from the shop floor up to the CEO of the company.
Yeah. And Stuart, to stay with you, what would you say would be the best or the most appropriate balance between global and local sourcing, right? Because, I mean, Walter has spoken about sourcing in China, and I just want to know, what would you say the best balance is, and what is the most efficient way to keep inventory turnover, would you say?
Yep. So, I mean, it is about balance at the end of the day. And I think, certainly Schneider is a very global company. So, in terms of opposing regional and global, we actually think it's a false construct. So in shorter supply chains, the core to that is really sustainability. That's what's driving the momentum there. Sure, geopolitical events are having some influence in that regard. But as I shared, we've built these 4 end-to-end regional hubs, which really do focus on the needs of those local markets. But short supply chains have vulnerabilities. And we've got to remember that there's a number of suppliers out there, or supply, which is truly globally entrenched. So if you look at electronic components, semiconductors, certain resins, you've got to look at how do you simplify those flows? How do you take out the many to many and get to the source of supply so you can drive the efficiency and assure or mitigate risk in the delivery to your production and your customers?
Yeah. Walter, over the past 20, 30 years that you've been in this position, would you say you've achieved that balance, and how?
Oh, it's totally changing.
Okay.
But for example, we're the biggest scissor maker in the world. Scissors have biggest cost is steel. China has half the steel of the world, and they're the most efficient producer. We're not moving production of scissors anywhere, and we've got a great operation. And it's also difficult because of tariffs. For example, if we were to ship Chinese steel to India, there's a 25% tariff. If it goes to Pakistan, I believe it's 15%. US, it's 25. No, it's staying in China, so that's where it is. But then there are other areas that we are exploring, and the Indo-Pacific is absolutely an area that we will develop in a much bigger way. Part of that is through our operations in India, but I have been looking at doing some sourcing or manufacturing in Eastern Africa, and it just makes sense to me because raw materials are there, a young workforce is there, and access to the markets is very quick through the Suez Canal. We did a big thing in Egypt, which is maybe up the Red Sea, so maybe that's called Indo-Pacific, but we've got a big chunk of gauze and tape and items that we currently use in our first aid and safety products, all coming from there. That's very different than it was 5 years ago. And we will be putting a lot of attention into this segment, into this area, in the coming 3 years.
Rita, you spoke about bringing manufacturing to this part of the world. How viable do you see this balance?
Yeah.
If you were to speak about that.
See, I mean, we know e-commerce. I will talk more about e-commerce. I would say e-commerce is kind of digital retailing, right? Retail business. So when you talk about retail, it's about serving your consumer, serving your customer. So I believe that e-commerce supply chain is going to be local. I mean, now we're not there, but it's going to be local because the consumer, the customer want it overnight, within 4 hours, within the same day, next day. They cannot wait for too long. So I have seen this happening, that now the manufacturing e-commerce regarding the home appliance, fashions, it's all manufacturing in China, that's true. But you see that e-commerce, I would say, all the e-commerce or all the supply chain company, I saw a survey yesterday saying that 90% of the Chinese company want to go outside of China, that they have a motivation to acquire, to serve the international or local consumers. And in order to do that, they will move their supply chain out of China, and the international or global or cross-border buying will be transforming into local buying. And e-commerce companies know that eventually they would need to digitalize or transform the local retailer, especially the SMEs, to sell online. That's why I see that now still 70% of the e-commerce shipments or supply chain come from China, but it's going to transfer. Even the supplier, the manufacturers in China, they will build a warehouse next to their consumers, and it become global sourcing and transforming into local sourcing.
You know, I think I have just experienced what you're talking about. We met a supplier, a Chinese supplier in Ethiopia,
Yeah.
and we talked about making first aid bags there. And they're getting the raw material through Djibouti, and it's Chinese material. and it would be perfect for us to be doing the production of the bags and then shipping them up to Egypt for filling. And again, it's a Chinese supplier moving there, one that we don't have a relationship with, but I'm very excited about that.
Can I add one point?
Yeah.
See, all the Chinese company, they want to go, transfer from global buying to local buying. But they have a challenge, which is, I think everyone here may maybe contribute to that or help them to solve the problem. They have a problem of the language, they have the problem of the localize. So if there's any ecosystem, we help them to make this simple for them. They know how to manufacture, they have the material, even they have the technology, they can invest. But how to land or how to build a company or warehouse or factory locally, it's kind of very challenge for most of the Chinese company. So I would say that if the government or the ecosystem would help them to make this easier, I would say it adds a lot of value to the ecosystem.
All right, thank you for that. And with that, the first session would be over. Thank you for joining us and for your insights. That was very helpful. So I would like to invite you guys off stage to invite the next batch of panelists. Joining me on stage by order is Honorable Moses Kiarie Kuria, Cabinet Secretary for Investment, Trade, and Industry in Kenya. Please welcome him. Second is His Excellency Sultan bin Rashid Al-Khater, Undersecretary at Qatar's Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Welcome. Third is Dr. Oziel Ndagijimana, Minister of Finance and Economic Planning at the Republic of Rwanda. And last but not least is Jay Schroff, who is the Group CEO at UPL Limited. Thank you and welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. In this conversation, we're going to be delving a little bit deeper into trade between Gulf and African countries. So we have representatives from both sides, and I'm going to get right into it and start by asking the questions. I hope they're questions you guys are happy to answer. So I'll start with you, Your Excellency. How do you think are the shifting geopolitical interests impacting trade today?
Well, I think Africa particularly is on a wake-up call because three factors have combined to get us out of our slumber. Let us begin with the pandemic and what we went through there in terms of, first of all, the issue of vaccine, the vaccine nationalism. And it was difficult. Africa was the last continent to get the vaccines. Yeah. As a result of that, we've woken up to that challenge. And now, for example, in Kenya, we've signed up a big deal with Moderna to set up the first vaccine factory in sub-Saharan Africa, something which could not have happened before the pandemic. And then a big upsurge, especially on digital trade and e-commerce, because of the realities of COVID. And then, of course, the war in Ukraine and the food crisis that it has, caused, and so many African countries waking up to the realities of food security, of food sustainability, of food self-reliance. Again, something that has gotten us out of the comfort zone that was there before. And then finally, on the issue of the trade tensions between China especially and the United States. And I think one of the panelists who was here before has talked about the big shift of Chinese companies into other places. And I must say that Africa, and particularly Kenya, we are enjoying unfortunately, this development because a lot of Chinese companies now moving into Africa and specifically to Kenya to take advantage of, the sort of preferential regime that exist between Kenya and other sub-Saharan countries, and Africa and the EU and the UK and the GCC.
Yeah.
So all this is creating new realities that were not there before in terms of the trade relationships.
Yeah. Your Excellency, Sultan, how do you think are geopolitics affecting trade today, and what are the main challenges you're seeing from your position?
Well, thank you, Abir. First of all, thank you for having me with the dear panelists here, and I'm happy to see that and to welcome as well all really the visitors to Qatar at the Economic Forum here. Well, geopolitics and the shifts that's happening around us, I mean, is really one of our day-to-day stories. I mean, and it's an everyday dilemma. We think that really countries have the wisdom really to look at these geopolitics interests and the shifts in it that bring really opportunities with them. We have learned a lot as well from these crises and turmoils, and we came stronger. Let me maybe reflect back on especially the specifics around Africa and Qatar, and also maybe the GCC. We look at our also strong ties that we have with Africa, and those are affected really by the historical really grounds that we share together, that is stemming from cultural, geographical, demographics, and really there are embedded capabilities and strengths within these two regions. And we see combining those really knowledge, combining those capabilities can really bridge over and meet those challenges and geopolitics shifts. Qatar has learned a lot through several shocks in the past, including compounded really crises that we have seen over the past decade. But we have moved on, and being stronger and capable, we built resilience. We met really our targets towards achieving our national vision. We see that the GCC and Africa, they are rich in what they have from natural resources that they are really gifted with. They are also rich in the human capital and the capacity that is available. The only thing is that we need to look at the opportunities where we can create economic rivers. We need those corridors. We need really to really build the hope, and we have the will, we have the endurance that we all share together. When I looked at some of the numbers, they are not really reflecting that in our really trade today. GCC have country, and especially Qatar, they have really expertise in the transformation projects where they can really deliver. And Africa, they have a lot of really kind of wealth in their natural resources. The reserves they have, especially in oil, gas, minerals, in the agriculture, in the water as well resources. We have desert on the other side here in the GCC, but we have transformed our really reserves, especially in oil and gas, to help developing other sectors. So we think that really this is how we need to overcome by overcome the geopolitics shifts or other shocks, to the global trade by creating economic rivers and corridors of cooperation.
Yeah. Minister, from your perspective and from Rwanda's perspective, what do you think are the main challenges to trade today?
Thank you. Geopolitical tensions, especially the war in Ukraine, have disrupted the global supply chain for many commodities, including energy, fertilizers, and food. This has resulted in global inflation almost everywhere. But for us in Africa, it's been a good lesson because we've been dependent on import of goods that we can produce locally, especially food, because Africa has about 60% of unused arable land. So there's a great potential for food production, for our national food security, but also for export. So also COVID-19 also have revealed similar weaknesses. Currently, in Africa, many countries really are taking measures to produce themselves or in the region essential goods, medical products, food, and others. So, as my colleague said, there is a great potential for domestic production in Africa, for intra-African trade, but also for export to the Gulf and to the rest of the world.
Yeah. Jay, you bring a unique perspective because you're the only non-government perspective on this panel. So what would you say to your industry is the biggest challenge? Is it geopolitics? Is it economical volatility? What would you say is the biggest trade obstacle right now?
Thank you. I'm just recovering from a bad throat, so excuse my voice. No, UPL is one of the largest agriculture, chemicals and seeds player in the world. We operate in 138 countries, delivering products on time for farmers to plant the seed, to grow their crop, to harvest their crop, and then to store their grain. And almost every farmer in the world at least buys one product from us. So you can imagine the complexity during the last 4 years of huge disruptions, whether it was the shipping crisis, COVID, or the post-COVID crisis. And managing all those supply chains with 45 manufacturing locations around the world. We try very hard to make sure that we meet the expectations. There is not only that volatility, but there is currency issues. There is volatility on currencies. There's exchange control in different countries at different periods of time. The food security today is a huge number one issue for most countries in the world. Everywhere I travel, when any governments you talk about, food security is either number one or number two issue. And this was not the case 5 years ago. I think the whole world took food for granted and that you could get food everywhere in time. I think the Ukraine crisis and the COVID crisis have brought this localization of food production as number one priority, and it is the number one issue. So for companies like us who are really behind the scene, making sure a farmer can produce the maximum yield, it's a huge logistics challenge. We've been doing it for 50 years, so it's part of our DNA to understand what happens when a country like Argentina has a problem on currency, or some countries in Africa have different kinds of challenges. The biggest challenge today, which is on top of this, which is going to get worse, is climate change. And climate change is also disrupting how we plan for our supply chain, because this is an El Nino year. Countries which have been getting a lot of rain are going to get less rain, and we have to start anticipating all these changes. So it's not going to get easier. I think the world is, with the decoupling happening, China plus one strategy, companies like us who are committed to deliver products to our customers without any supply chain disruption have huge investments. So we we would invest at least $500 million a year just to make sure that we have redundancy in case of all these political disruptions.
Yeah.
Very easy for politicians to create all these barriers, but for people who have to supply and deliver, we have to anticipate these things, and it's a big challenge. But that's the way of the world. I think it's not going to get easier. We just have to prepare better and invest more.
Yeah, and Minister, Your Excellency, from Qatar's perspective, I want to know what strategies and what incentives the government is offering to better trade relations in general, and in Qatar's case, what is Qatar doing to enhance trade?
Yeah. In this respect, Qatar also as a member state within the GCC, they really operate in a way that to really enhance and advance the global trade. We're looking at also a unified market within GCC, and we developed several economic agreements with different countries and economic blocs worldwide in order really to create a hub, between those markets and also to utilize the strengths that we do have, since we do have really access to capital here and financing in this region. And also we have the expertise, to deliver to other nations with respect to our deliverability of really large scale projects and transformational projects. The economic agreements and FTAs we did with several countries in order really to boost that kind of trade mechanisms. I know that economic shocks, they do slowdowns and disruptions, to some of really the key metrics of those trade really targets. But however, the dialogue is so important, and we have seen now countries, they adopt a strategic dialogues with several really leaders of the global economy. And we do also embed within our mechanisms, whether on a national strategy or GCC, from GCC objectives, we adopt really some approaches of incentives that we can really attract foreign direct investments. We do also offer some opportunities of partnerships, especially in the public and private partnership goals. We invite companies to participate in several development projects in Qatar and in GCC. And we do also look at really how to also contribute to other nations' development agenda. Our focus as well is now into Africa, since we knew that both GCC and Africa have something in common, which is it's the aim of a global trade. Everybody is looking at those really regions as rich in their resources, and whether they want to do really financing or search for capital or for natural resources. So we have really now really some kind of negotiating position to offer leading economies as well, who are kind of ready for mass production or delivering whatever is possible to enhance GDPs worldwide for those countries. But our aim would be looked at as well, whatever is essential to help really nations and people directly, solving their problems, providing their essential needs. We would love to really see this put as our priority. And these are also serving the SDGs and serving the other international goals that all really countries are member of those international bodies.
Okay, Minister Moses, what do you think are the best strategies to support trade, and what do you think should Kenya or other governments do to support trade, bilateral trade?
I think the first thing that I would see is, first of all, building on the people-to-people relationship. That is the biggest impediment between trade between Africa and Kenya in that case, and the rest of the world. But the minute we get to understand each other from a people-to-people perspective, then it's going to be much easier to trade. That process of people-to-people relationship is going to be cut short by the technology and e-commerce and digital trade. Once we enable our peoples to, to be able to trade online, then even the sort of ignorance that comes in between people and knowing each other is going to be overcome. The biggest impediment also we're having is on the issues of logistics. And as my brother here has said, for example, there's no reason why the GCC is not trading with Africa. If I leave Doha to Nairobi, I will get to Nairobi much faster than somebody who is leaving LA to go to Washington, D.C., which is one country. So essentially, we are one people. And you're going to see much more movement on this, especially on south to south. If somebody is leaving East Africa to go to Indonesia, for example, today it takes 24 hours because of the way they have to connect flights. But if there were a direct flight would take only 6 hours. And the shipping time is even much shorter. So the minute we get over on these people-to-people issues, we get over on the logistics, we embrace technology more, and then we start to see how can we be able to add to each other. Of course, the green conversation is also paramount to that. I am sitting next to my brother here, and we sit on extremely different sides of the equation in terms of energy. Today, Kenya, our energy is 92% clean. And 92%, of course, on the other side is the other side of energy. So you find this sort of complementarity in terms of, the race towards net zero. It will also, work to accelerate between the relationship between Africa and GCC, for example, and as indeed in other countries. Of course, we are also, as Kenya, signing several trade agreements. We are in advanced stages of concluding a strategic trade and investment partnership with the U.S., the first one in Africa, about to conclude an EPA with the EU, about to conclude a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with the UAE. So, these sort of agreements and building blocks that we are building also on technology. Let me just mention something about technology. Africa is now home to 1.3 billion people. By the year 2050, 1 out of every 4 humans is going to be in Africa. And I always say is that going forward to the future, there is only going to be 2 categories of businesses. Businesses that are in Africa and businesses that are extinct, because Africa is the only remaining frontier for growth. So if you take for Kenya, for example, we've got a pioneering role in terms of mobile money, which is fueling e-commerce, M-Pesa, which is world acclaimed, mobile money service, and I would think the first one. $1 billion worth of transactions pass through M-Pesa every day. 5 million businesses are powered by M-Pesa with 81 million transactions every day. So this sort of foundation makes it easier for us to take the leading role in technology, which again is also going to open a new frontier in terms of trade.
And Your Excellency, briefly on Rwanda's strategies to enhance trade, not necessarily with the Gulf, but to enhance and support trade relations. What is happening there?
Thank you. Number one, Rwanda has created a competitive business environment. We are now the best place to do business in Africa, and this has attracted the international investment from different countries, like Volkswagen from Germany, BioNTech in vaccine manufacturing, which is starting this year. Machines are already in place in Kiarie. And also we have developed a mechanism to attract innovations. So we have a destination for different innovative technologies. We are also aware of the challenge of access to finance for investors, for local investors. So we have created a fund to support new investment in selected sectors, including in agriculture value chains, in manufacturing, and we have special incentives for exports. We have an export growth facility which support companies to explore market outside Rwanda. And we are working hard to take advantage of the new African Continental Free Trade Area. With regard to trade between Africa, Rwanda, and Africa in general, with the Gulf region, there is really potential to grow the existing bilateral trade, and all the factors of production are there. There is enough capital in the Gulf, in Qatar and the other countries here. And in Africa, especially in the area of agriculture, we have land, we have labor. So put together these capacities, we can really promote production, and we can increase the volume of trade between the two regions.
Jay, I'm keen to know from your perspective, how do you think governments can support industry players on tackling supply chain issues, especially when it comes to agriculture? I mean, we've heard from government perspectives, but I would be keen to hear from someone in the industry. What do you think governments are doing good, and what you think, what things you think can be done better to support industries?
Yeah. So I think, just stepping back, I mean, food security is such a big issue today for everybody. And localizing food is also a key part of that. And I believe that the biggest challenge in Africa is farmer resilience. And if you do not have a farmer who can make sure he can have some money saved to educate his children, to build his house, or to take medical care of himself, he's not resilient. If he's not resilient, the farmer is not bankable, right? So if you go to any bank around the world, at least with smallholder farmers, if you ask them to lend them, they run. They don't want to go anywhere near that. The risk is too high. The farmers cannot meet his own financial needs. So what is happening to the world? That you're eating every day, 3 times a day at least, and the supplier of your food is the poorest person in the supply chain. He has no money left at the end of the cycle to save, to reinvest. This is a very, it's ironic that this strata of, 80% of the world's food is produced by smallholder farmers. And these are the poorest people in the world. So there is a contradiction. So I think from my point of view, we as the industry or as the government or as have to build a system where farmers become more resilient. If farmers become resilient, you will automatically have innovation, financial inclusion, because one of the biggest issues is if you do not have any finance available for agriculture, for the farmers, if they cannot borrow money and are part of the system, you can never have food security, because these guys will produce just enough for themselves and maybe sell a little bit, and that cycle goes on and on. So I believe policies around financial inclusion of the agriculture food system, it has to go right from the procurement side to the understanding the challenges. Climate change is only going to make that worse. So what challenges you have today is just a preview of what you're going to have tomorrow. And I believe that if it is not talking about food security, which is going to solve the problem. It's talking about creating resilient food system, resilient farmer who is right in the middle. I mean, we are a key input supplier. So for us, we understand what happens when there's a drought. He has no money, he's finished, and he starts again, all over again. So I would like to say is that we should focus on the whole supply chain for food security, identify the weak links, like making a resilient farmer, and that will have financial inclusions because the financial sector will innovate like M-Pesa, so many other innovations for small farmer lending, and that will drive the food security of the world.
So you're joined today by 3 government officials. If you were to put, an item on an action course, one item to better food security and enhance food systems, what would it be? Just one item course.
Sure. No, I think focusing on farmer resilience would be number one. That would drive a huge investment in agriculture, which is needed.
Okay, Minister, briefly, what do you think are trade opportunities that can exist between Africa and the Gulf? What do you think, if you were to, top item in your head, what do you think would it be the top item that could constitute opportunities between Gulf and African nations, including Kenya?
Top of my mind is food, because Africa still have a lot of potential for food and agriculture, and Kenya in that case. The GCC mostly imports all the food, and I see a big scope for collaboration between the GCC and Africa, particularly in the area of financial services to service this very huge market. I see a lot of potential for collaboration. Kenya is working with Qatar on the development of the Nairobi International Financial Center, so that the next big financial services institution is not managing Africa from Dubai or London or other places. And this is one very interesting conversation and discussion that is happening now between Kenya and Qatar. And also in the area of logistics. And Qatar Airways, for example, has been, and Emirates as well, has been extremely successful in terms of helping us in terms of logistics with the rest of the world. Now the big opportunity even exists with the interconnectivity of logistics within Africa itself. It is not uncommon to find that for you to move from one corner of Africa to another corner, you have to go to Europe, and then from Europe or Dubai, and then get back to Africa. And I see a big scope for cooperation in that particular area.
Your Excellency, top item in your head that could constitute trade between Africa and the Gulf?
I think the exchange of really strengths and really those capabilities that are rich within Africa, especially in natural resources, especially in minerals, and also the expertise and the access to agriculture, versus what we have here as well with respect to access to finance from our region. We have really a capital to invest in those aspects. And also looking at what we have done as well from being knowledgeable in delivering mega and large-scale projects. In Qatar, we have built really world-class infrastructure and facilities from what my colleagues mentioned earlier, airports, seaports, that have really access to the whole world. That makes really Qatar specifically within GCC region as a center between several continents, north to south and east to west. And really we are positioned to serve the purpose of strengthening these really relations with Africa and really creating more corridors. And I can reuse that name, economic rivers. We need to flow those rivers between really Qatar and Africa and the regions.
Yeah. Minister, final word with you.
Thank you. I want to add one word to what Mr. just said about the resilience of farmers. Climate risk is a serious issue And whatever we do, we need to take into consideration that risk. So in Rwanda is taking serious measures for climate mitigation and adaptation, and we are mainstreaming climate risk in all our developmental activities. And recently, Rwanda was among a few countries that accessed the new Resilience and Sustainability Trust Fund of the IMF to support our climate action. So it's really something we need to keep as a top priority. With regard to trade between Africa and the Gulf, there are many opportunities, as I said. Currently, we are partnering with Qatar in logistics, in air transport, aviation, both aviation and airport. We want to create a big capacity for passenger transport, but also for cargo to serve Africa and to connect Africa to the world. There is a potential in mineral processing, precious metals and others, and all critical metals that really are used in the electronics industry. In agriculture, we are investing in irrigation systems to grow production, but also to mitigate the drought effect. So, but we want to add value to whatever we have. We want to move from export raw materials to processed goods. So, and the countries in the Gulf, with the financial capacity, we can partner to really to improve on our production and the trade.
All right. Well, good luck on all your endeavors. And thank you for joining us today. And thank you for everyone for joining us this morning. Please give a hand for the panelists one more time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.